and welcome to our session today. I'm here with Mark Beland, the Community Liaison at Avow Hospice, to discuss revealing the myths and magic of hospice. 4 years ago, Mark joined the marketing team at Avow Hospice in order to create awareness about Avow's hospice care, palliative care, grief support, and caregiver support services, and how these services can help the members of our community deal with terminal illnesses and the passing away of loved ones. We've set up for today a question and answer format to help you learn the truth of what hospice has to offer to patients as well as their family members, and to dispel the myths that keep people from considering hospice care. So let's get started. So first, Mark, can you begin by giving just a short history on hospice and how it got to where it is today?
Yes, most historians point to a woman who was in England known as Dame Cicely Saunders. And in 1967, she founded St. Christopher's Hospice. And it was because she saw a need for people who were at end of life to not only receive more medical care as far as their physical needs, but also to look into their emotional and spiritual needs as well. And that's why she began hospice. And a few years later, that inspired a movement in the United States, the hospice movement, which now we have over 5,500 hospices just in the U.S. alone, who serve approximately 1.5 million people per year.
Oh my goodness, didn't realize that. So there are a great many misunderstandings about what hospice is and how it all works. Is hospice a place where really sick people go and never come back? Does that mean that once they go there, their families will never see them again?
Hospice in general refers to the medical care that's provided. It's very specialized to somebody who has a serious illness, actually a terminal illness, with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live. Not all hospice companies have a facility, an inpatient type of facility. We do have one here in Naples. It's our hospice house that has 16 rooms. And that actually represents a very small percentage of the people that we take care for on a given day. So, for example, most of the patients that we have are taken care for in their homes or facilities or wherever it is they live. Our hospice house is strictly for people in crisis care that prefer to be in an inpatient unit.
Okay.
And as far as the families, we actually encourage families to be very involved with their loved ones at the end of life.
Well, are there only certain physical ailments that a person can have before they're able to use hospice services? In other words, are cancer patients maybe the only type of patient able to go to hospice? And is hospice only for older people?
Well, your first part of the question, as far as if there's only certain type of ailments, is any type of disease. It could be lung disease, heart disease, dementia, Parkinson's, ALS, MS, stroke victims, as well as cancer patients. So as they have any type of terminal illness, we can take care of them. As far as ages, it's all ages. And I found out something that was initially devastating just a little while ago before coming here. I knew that we had a pediatric patient, and I wanted to get some information about the age. In my mind, I pictured a child. Wasn't sure if it was a teenager or younger, maybe with cancer. I found out that the pediatric admission that we had was a 10-week-old baby girl. And at first I was blown away. You don't like to think of a baby in hospice care. However, I asked a little bit more about what was involved. The baby had a congenital defect. And what would have been more devastating is if the family hadn't been receiving the support that we have with our nurse and social worker and our chaplains who are visiting the patients frequently each week and really helping them through a very difficult time. So yes, there's times where things are situations are devastating, but what's worse is when people don't seek the kind of help that's geared to help people with these experiences.
So is hospice only for people who don't need a high level of care?
On the contrary, when people are at end of life, they usually need more care.
Okay.
Which is why we have a hospice team at Avow. Not all hospice teams are the same, but we have a very extensive one to the extent that we have a physician, nurse, social worker, chaplain, hospice aides, volunteers that provide companion and respite care, and 4 types of therapies. We have music, art, massage, and Reiki therapy. And that team is there focused on making sure that the patient gets the best quality of life for whatever time they have left remaining, as well as helping the family through the difficult process of having a loved one with a terminal illness.
That's good to know. So the Hippocratic Oath that every doctor takes covers several important ethical issues between doctors and patients. It establishes that the doctors give deference to medicine and serves as a contract of sorts for doctors to work towards the benefit of the health of the public. So how does hospice interact with doctors in helping to provide another option, if you will, when medication and medical procedures just don't have a high percentage of possible success ratio? Do they help a family make some potentially very hard decisions about end-of-life choices?
Yes, we work with both physicians and families. With physicians, it's a matter of education, maybe going over some of what we call the red flags of a patient that they have to see that they may be appropriate for hospice, such as uncontrolled pain, consistent weight loss, lack of mobility, and frequent falls. Those are just a few of the signs, and many other types of education that we discuss with physicians in order them to make hospice referrals in a more timely manner when it's more appropriate to consider hospice versus towards the end, towards the very end of life. We also work with families and help them through the process of making a decision, even if somebody is a hospice appropriate, whether or not they want to go with hospice versus continuing to seek treatments.
Okay.
What happens is, I noticed in your question the words "in the patient's best interest." The challenge we run into is that physicians are focused on treating the disease. And in the process, there may not be a question as to whether the patient would prefer to continue receiving treatments that are maybe very harmful to the quality of their life. And also from the family, pressure from the family to have them undergo those treatments because they don't want to lose their loved ones. So the doctors are doing what they're trained to do, and the family loves their family member and they don't want to lose them. But a lot of times the patient themselves are not being considered as far as what's really truly in their best interest. And what we like to see is at least a dialogue and to know what the options are, and then they can make a decision or not, whether they want to continue seeking treatments or allow that person to have the best quality of life if they know that they have limited time left.
Wow. So if a patient has their own doctor, is that doctor as well as the rest of the family shielded from and excluded from the care of the individual in hospice?
Not at all. Doctors can actually serve as the attending physician, even though we do have physicians that are obviously specialized in hospice care. Someone can stay with their physician and they can oversee their care as long as they're following the guidelines of hospice. So as long as the care is based on comfort care versus trying to cure the illness. So somebody can actually go into hospice and revoke hospice and go back to curative treatments. If they prefer, they can always change their mind. They're not signing their life away. But whatever treatment they have under hospice has to follow those guidelines. But they don't have to switch from the physician to our physician.
Okay.
And as far as the family goes, again, we always try to keep the family as involved, both with the care of the patient and also with us caring for the family.
It's needed in both places, isn't it?
Yes.
So in the past, there's been a great deal of information that has come out about euthanasia and physician-assisted deaths. What's the exact goal of hospice and how does it differ from these two concepts?
Yeah, it actually differs very much in the sense that the goal of hospice is to make sure that the patient has peace of mind and the best quality of life, and it's being taken care of at all levels, the physical, spiritual, and emotional levels, as well as, again, working with the family and making sure that they're able to deal to the best that they can with a loved one. As far as euthanasia and assisted, suicide, those are illegal, first of all. Secondly, that's not the goal to accelerate someone's death, even if it was legal. Our goal is to let them run their natural course, but in the best possible way that they can do that. What happens is many times when somebody comes to hospice, they go from taking maybe 15 medications to 3 medications. And then all of a sudden they start to feel better. They become more energetic, they become more mobile. We've had people graduate from hospice, meaning that at one point, in order to become a hospice patient, they had to have a prognosis by 2 physicians of 6 months or less, and then they get to a point where they no longer have that prognosis, that their condition improves. So many times, instead of us being an organization that's trying to accelerate or limit their life, we actually enhance their life. We don't claim to do that because the goal is not to provide curative care, but to provide focus on the patient and the family. But sometimes that does happen. Another thing about what we do is we actually look to see if there's signs of potential suicidal thoughts. And our social workers are very geared towards that. And if there is, we try to get them help to the best we can. We actually had a patient who was very depressed, and the social worker recommended he get involved in art therapy. And he worked with Jenny. Initially he was reluctant. He had never been involved with art and didn't want anything to do with it. But he agreed to meet with Jenny, our art therapist. And initially he was just doing stick figures. And part of art therapy is not just drawing, but talking about the meaning of what you're drawing. And he just drew a box and he said, well, that's a door to the other side. And that's what came to mind. And he agreed to have her come back. And little by little he started using colors and pastels and telling his life story. And he got excited about meeting with her on a regular basis. And towards the end, the last thing he drew was a large truck with a horn, and she asked him what that meant. He goes, that's me coming to heaven to blow my horn and say, here I am, get ready, I'm coming. And he passed away soon after that. He confided in Jenny that he actually was about to commit suicide before he started the art therapy. So when I hear about the myth and it's out there about us being some type of euthanasia, I know, I'm respecting our time, but it's something I can go on and on about. It's a true myth, for sure.
Good. So the conversation about death is not an easy one for any of us. So even those who have strong religious beliefs can be frightened about the end of life fears about pain and how we're going to be in those final days of our lives. Can you address medications that are and are not used with the hospice concept, as well as the ideas of withholding nutrition and hydration during the dying process?
Yes, the medications that we use are to be able to make the patient comfortable. For example, morphine would be one of those, as well as others. And the goal is to give them the least amount of medication required to provide that comfort. So when somebody gets involved in early intervention, they may not need to get, well, in fact, I met in my first 2 weeks, I met a lady we were taking care of at a facility here in Naples who had just found out she graduated from hospice. And she had told me her story, but one of the things is she had always been on this time control type morphine, very low dose. So it's when somebody is referred to us, and unfortunately, very often people are referred to us when they only have a few days or even a few hours left to live. And that's when people sometimes think that's when you refer to hospice, because that's when they are told about hospice. And that's why it's important people be their own self-advocates and ask questions, and they could actually contact Avow. But what happens is when we get people at that very end stage, they may require more morphine, to the point where they may not even be able to communicate. And then at that point, it's natural for them to no longer eat and drink. And if we were to try to force that in any way, it would create all kinds of complications and discomfort, and actually possibly they can choke and actually end their life sooner. So our goal is to allow them to pass away as comfortably and naturally as possible, and that's why food isn't administered towards the end of life.
Okay. So does hospice have any type of religious affiliation, and do they honor a person's individual belief system and their preferences for what they might need at the end of life regarding those preferences?
Yes, it's no to the specific, it's yes to a universal approach. Our chaplains only provide spiritual care based on the patient and the family's wishes. And for example, we will also not only have chaplains work with them, but if they're new in town or they weren't involved with a church or another faith-based organization, our chaplains will help facilitate that. So if they do not have a priest and they're looking to have a priest come visit them, they'll reach out, or they'll reach out to a Baptist pastor or rabbi. We actually had a request from a family to have a memorial service after the patient passed away, to be facilitated by Buddhist monks. And I actually attended that, and it was right up the street from this church here. And it was really interesting, but it wasn't easy either. A chaplain reached out to somebody locally who was out of town and couldn't get here, and they referred us to somebody on the East Coast, and there were 6 Buddhist monks that came and provided this service. So we will do everything we possibly can to make sure that the patients and the family's spiritual needs are met.
Nice, good. So here's the age-old question. Are hospice services expensive? And how are these services usually paid for by the individual?
Hospice services are, and our billing manager doesn't like me to say free or at no cost, because there may be some exceptions, but generally speaking, most of our patients have Medicare, which covers hospice care. We're very careful that if there was something outside of the guidelines that we would communicate with the family. Therefore, hospice is actually a financial advantage for a lot of people to be involved in hospice even sooner than what normally occurs. We also accept Medicaid, private insurance, self-pay, and we're a nonprofit organization, and we will take care of anyone regardless of whether they have insurance or money to pay for services. I recently spoke with Michael Overway, who's the executive director of the Collier County Hunger and Homeless Coalition, and he shared with me a story. He was out meeting with homeless people in the community, and he met a lady whose husband was a hospice patient of ours, and he had recently passed, and she shared with him about the dignity he received and how much he appreciated the care. So I'll often mention that we'll take care of everyone, even homeless people, but to hear the story was very emotional.
That's heartwarming, yes. So can hospice only help when family members are available to provide care? Many seniors live alone without family members nearby. How does that work?
And that's a great question, because sometimes people confuse hospice with, say, general home care.
Right.
The answer to whether we can provide hospice care is yes, even if they live alone and they're having trouble, and there may be more of a reason for them to get involved with hospice. Not for us to be able to provide 24/7 home care per se, especially if they're not in crisis mode, because if they're in routine mode, our team will make weekly visits. So we can help to some extent. But what will happen is we'll have a social worker that will look into what resources are available. It may be moving that person to a facility if they agree, and that's possible, or it may be finding a home health or home care agency that can care for them. So there's always an advantage to being involved with hospice to get that additional help and find those resources.
Well, I believe there's a great deal of misinformation out there that hospice is a place of last resort. And once you go into hospice, you've basically given up. Can you address that?
Yes, it's a very common thought that people don't want to give up, so they don't want to consider hospice. And the truth is, when somebody has a terminal illness, even things like dementia and Parkinson's that could go on for years and years, there comes a point where there's just no treatments available. And the question is not whether or not you're giving up, but is there a type of care available that can actually help enhance their lives and help their families? We find that when people get involved with hospice earlier, the grieving process is less. Also, being spiritual helps. We find that our chaplains will tell you people that are spiritual have an easier time dealing with the loss of a loved one, even though it's difficult. It's the same thing with working with our staff, and we gear people towards those and preparing for those types of outcomes. So it's more so that they're not giving up, they're embracing more help when it's really needed.
Good way to put that. Well, for my last question, so life can be hard, and often individuals come to the end of their lives with a great deal of unresolved issues. Does hospice have staff to be able to help these individuals cope and come to terms with issues that might be able to provide them with some relief and comfort during their last days?
Yes, and for example, our team is there for that purpose. Whether it be our chaplain to help them deal with their spiritual needs, or social worker to help with their emotional needs of both the patient and the family. Also, sometimes it could be a nurse, a hospice aide, or a volunteer that's just there. And very often, a patient will confide more in them than they will with their own family members, and it's very cathartic for them to be able to talk to somebody. So there's many ways where we help people resolve issues. One of the things that I recently heard about was a patient that we had referred by a case manager in Immokalee. And I asked her afterwards how it went, because the family was very reluctant, and she really had to work on getting them to the point where they were comfortable admitting him. And at the time they admitted him, his physician knew, and we knew, that he had no more than 2 weeks left to live. But what we encouraged the family to do, what they did, is have people come visit. And instead of waiting for memorial service and having everybody there, do it ahead of time and really have that closure before he passed away. And the case manager said that his daughter said it was one of the best experiences ever. So to me, that's the magic of hospice, when you take what would normally be the worst experience ever and make it one of the most special and memorable and meaningful experiences.
Well, you've answered a lot of questions for us. Is there anything that we might have missed that you'd want to share with us? I think we covered quite a bit here.
You did, and I appreciate that. Just that if anybody has any questions, they don't have to wait to be referred. They can call Avow and we can answer questions. We could even do evaluations if somebody appears that they might be appropriate for hospice.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I thank you so much for making the time today to come and do this instead of our workshop. Thank you for that. To those of you who are watching, if there are other questions, please don't hesitate to call us here at the church. We can get you in touch with Mark. And again, thank you so much for watching this, and I hope that we've been able to give you some true information on this topic. Thanks again. Bye for now.